the Green Children of Woolpit. In 12th century England, two children appeared in the village of Woolpit with completely green skin, speaking a language nobody had ever heard, and refusing to eat anything. The boy became sick and died shortly after they arrived, but the girl survived, eventually learned English, and said they had come from an underground place called St. Martin's Land, where the sky was always dim and everything around them was green. She said they had followed the sound of bells and suddenly found themselves in the daylight of Woolpit, completely disoriented. Scientists have pointed to hypochromic anemia, a severe iron deficiency that can actually tint the skin a greenish color, suggesting they were malnourished children from an extremely isolated community. But this does not explain the unknown language, and no community matching their description has ever been identified. The case is recorded in multiple independent historical sources and remains without any explanation that covers all of its details. The sleep sickness. Between 1915 and 1926, a mysterious illness called encephalitis lethargica swept the world and left nearly 1 million people dead, and millions more in a state where their bodies simply stopped responding. Patients would develop a fever, then gradually fall into a condition where they could not move. Many of them stayed this way for decades. They were fully conscious, aware of everything around them, able to think clearly, but completely unable to move or speak or communicate. They sat in institutions for years requiring full care just to stay alive. In the 1960s, neurologist Oliver Sacks gave these long frozen patients a drug called L-Dopa, which had been developed for Parkinson's disease. Patients who had been motionless for 30 or 40 years suddenly woke up and began talking and moving again. In most cases, the effect was temporary, and they eventually returned to their frozen state, but for a brief period they came back entirely. The illness vanished completely after 1926 and has never returned, which makes it almost impossible to study directly. The leading theory involves an immune response to a specific bacterial strain, causing the body to mistakenly attack its own brain tissue. But no pathogen has ever been confirmed, and there is still no explanation for why it appeared globally and why it simply stopped. The bloop. In 1997, underwater microphones operated by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration picked up an extraordinarily powerful sound from the deep South Pacific Ocean. They called it the bloop. It was detected simultaneously by sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart from each other, meaning whatever produced it was releasing a massive amount of acoustic energy, far beyond what any known animal on Earth is capable of generating. The frequency and pattern of the sound matched the biological profile of a living creature rather than any geological event like an earthquake or volcanic activity. NOAA later suggested the most likely cause was a phenomenon called an icequake, where large Antarctic ice sheets fracturing and grinding can produce sounds that travel enormous distances through ocean water and sometimes carry biological-sounding characteristics. Most scientists now accept this. However, it has never been precisely matched to any specific icequake event, and the bloop has not been detected a single time since that one recording in 1997. The Overtoun Dog Suicide Bridge. In Dumbarton, Scotland, a stone bridge called Overtoun Bridge has seen over 50 dogs leap from the exact same spot since the 1950s, with many dying from the fall. It is always the same location on the bridge, always the same side, and in some documented cases, dogs that survived reportedly returned to the exact same edge and jumped again. The most credible explanation centers on scent. The area beneath that section of the bridge is heavily populated by mink, which produce extremely pungent markings, as well as mice and squirrels. Dogs have a sense of smell tens of thousands of times more sensitive than humans. The theory is that dogs become so fixated on the scent that they lose situational awareness and move toward the source without registering the drop, helped by the fact that the stone walls are tall enough to block the view of the fall below. This is plausible, but it does not explain why this pattern is specific to one bridge, one spot, across 7 decades and dozens of completely different individual dogs, while comparable bridges in the same region show nothing similar. The man from Taured. In 1954, a man arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport carrying a passport that listed his country of origin as Taured, a nation that does not exist. He spoke several languages, said he was there on a business trip, and when customs officers told him no such country existed, he was visibly confused. He pointed to the area on a map between France and Spain, corresponding to the small principality of Andorra, and insisted that Taured had existed for over 1,000 years. His passport appeared completely legitimate, showed entry stamps from multiple previous trips to Japan, and his wallet contained real European currency from several countries. Authorities held him in a guarded hotel room overnight while they tried to verify his identity. The next morning, he was gone, and the documents that had been confiscated and stored separately had also disappeared. No record of him was ever found, and no explanation for how he left a guarded room was established. The story has been repeated so many times that some researchers question whether it is documented fact or a legend that grew detail over time, but it has also never been definitively debunked. The Kentucky Meat Shower. On March 9, 1876, chunks of raw meat fell from a completely clear sky over Bath County, Kentucky, covering an area of roughly 100 by 50 meters over the course of several minutes. Multiple people witnessed it, samples were collected from the ground, and scientific analysis confirmed the material was real biological tissue, including lung, muscle, cartilage, and what appeared to be bear and horse among other animals. Two men present there reportedly tasted some of it and identified pieces as mutton and venison. The leading explanation is that a group of vultures flying overhead became startled and triggered a chain reaction of mass regurgitation, since vultures commonly vomit when alarmed and feed in large communal groups, which would account for the volume and variety of tissue. Most scientists consider this plausible, but no one observed any birds. The event was not witnessed as it started, and a spontaneous coordinated mass regurgitation of that scale from animals in flight has never been documented before or since. The Pollock twins. In 1957, John Pollock of Northumberland, England, lost both his daughters when a car struck them as they were walking to church. Joanna was 11 and Jacqueline was 6. The following year, his wife gave birth to twin girls. John noticed immediately that one twin had a birthmark on her hip, matching exactly the location of a scar Jacqueline had from a prior childhood injury, and a second birthmark on her forehead, matching a scar Jacqueline had above her eye. As the twins grew older, they reportedly asked for toys that had belonged to the dead sisters without ever being shown them, and displayed what their parents described as a specific and unusual fear of cars approaching from a certain directions. By around age 5, these behaviors had completely faded. Psychiatrist Land Stevenson, who spent decades collecting cases of apparent past life recall in children, documented this case thoroughly but drew no firm conclusions. Skeptics argue the father's strong personal belief in reincarnation led him to unconsciously guide the children and interpret normal behavior as significant. The birthmarks remain the hardest element to give a satisfying conventional answer. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is a handwritten book carbon dated to the early 15th century, roughly 240 pages long, filled with detailed illustrations of plants that match no known species, astronomical diagrams, and biological drawings. Every page contains text written in an unknown script that no one has been able to decode in over 600 years. What separates it from other undeciphered writing is how it behaves statistically. Its word frequency distribution matches the patterns of real human languages. Certain characters appear more often at the beginning of words, others more often at the end, which is a property of genuine writing systems rather than random symbols. It does not look like gibberish, it looks like a real language. Despite being studied by professional cryptographers, trained linguists, and wartime code breakers who cracked major encryption systems during World War II, not a single word has ever been translated. It currently sits unread at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library. The Mel's Hole Phenomenon. In 1997, a man named Mel Waters called into Art Bell's nationally syndicated radio program and described a hole on his property in rural Washington state that appeared to have no bottom. He claimed to have lowered over 80,000 feet of weighted fishing line without ever hitting anything. He also said a neighbor had thrown a dead dog into the hole, and later that same day saw the same dog alive and running through the nearby woods. Over subsequent calls, the story grew further, with claims that the hole emitted a field that kept animals away from its edge, and that a researcher had pulled up a bag from inside, containing a living seal of an extinct species. No physical evidence of the hole has ever been produced. No matching property records have been found in Washington state. Geological surveys of the area he described found nothing unusual. Most researchers treat it as a fabricated story. However, genuine field attempts by locals and investigators to find the location produced nothing, but also never resulted in definitive proof that Mel Waters was a fictional identity or that the radio calls were staged. The Eridanus supervoid. When astronomers mapped the cosmic microwave background, the radiation left over from the Big Bang that fills the entire observable universe, they expected small random temperature variations spread evenly in all directions. Instead, in the direction of the constellation Eridanus, they found a region roughly a billion light-years across where this background radiation is significantly colder than everything surrounding it. They call it the cold spot. It corresponds to an enormous supervoid, a region of space containing far fewer galaxies and far less matter than the rest of the universe around it. A supervoid of this size and temperature difference is not something current cosmological models predict should exist. Some physicists have proposed it could be evidence of a collision between our universe and a parallel one during the earliest moments after the Big Bang, leaving a cold imprint in our background radiation at that location. This is not accepted by mainstream cosmology. The standard explanation involves radiation losing energy as it passes through large, empty regions of space, but even this does not fully account for the degree of coldness measured there, and no model has yet completely explained the cold spot.